Before we get started, just a reminder that you can find all of my available rental properties on my website at marcguzman.com. If you own investment property, click on the Owner Services section to see our complete list of services. This episode and wine tasting is sponsored by Lanny Clark with Prime Lending. Lanny Clark is a loan officer specializing in residential home lending. He communicates with you every step of the way, and his honesty sets him apart from the rest. He's able to think outside of the box due to his experience and is able to tailor a loan program to fit your needs. If you can't qualify just yet, not a problem. He will let you know what you need to do in order to be ready. Lanny is also backed by Prime Lending, which is one of the biggest and fastest growing lending banks in the nation. They have simplified the home lending process down to 5 steps. And FYI, step number 5 is to relax and enjoy your new home. So contact Lanny Clark today at 510-964-0620. As any parent can tell you, parenting can be very hard. Building a stable family also presents its challenges. Luckily, there are people like Cathy Botello who runs the C.O.P.E Family Support Center. C.O.P.E is a nonprofit organization that works to provide supportive services to all families in Contra Costa County in hopes of strengthening family bonds and creating a better overall world for children. Between workshops and classes for helping new parents or combating bullying and child abuse, the people at C.O.P.E work very hard every day to provide the next generation of Contra Costa County the tools to create the better world we strive for. How do they pull this off? Cathy is here to tell us. Cathy, thank you for being on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So one thing I like to ask every single guest is what has your attention? So this could be a book, a movie, it could be a side hobby you have. What has your attention these days?
Well, I'll tell you what, my attention all goes to my work and my passion for helping people and helping families. So that may be a boring answer, but that's really the truth. I think aside from that is, my family, all of my kids are gone and out of the house. So it's just my husband and I, and it's a kind of our time to sort of grow together again.
What's very interesting about that answer is probably half of the guests that I ask that question to easily say, well, I'm here to talk about my passion. What I do is what I'm passionate about. That's got my attention 100%. And it's very interesting because what we were just briefly talking before we started to record is the reason why I'm doing this podcast. One of the reasons is it's very interesting to see the passion that many people here in the Bay Area have with what they do. And I think when I ask that question, it's funny, I always expect some kind of different response, like, oh, this movie's been catching my attention, or this music artist and that sort of thing. But most people come back and say, no, it's what I'm doing. Right. And they just dive into it head first. It's pretty amazing.
Well, I had a conversation with one of my staff this morning who is from Europe, and she was commenting actually this morning about the difference between social life in Europe and social life in the United States. And she was saying, it's all about work here. There's no social life. You have less issues to think about as far as security and that sort of thing if you're in certain parts of Europe. But she said out there, it's people take 2.5 hours for lunch. They take a month off for vacation. That's very common. And here we just work. So
yeah, in the little bit of travel that I've done in my lifetime, that's one thing I've noticed with every country I've gone to is the pace of life is so much slower. If you go to Costa Rica, oh my God, it's so slow out there. Right. But and you get used to it after 1 or 2 weeks. It's very nice. And then you come back here to the fast paced lifestyle and it kind of makes you want to go back to something a little bit calmer, not so fast lifestyle. But yeah, I mean, if you go to Spain, I think at 11 o'clock every single night, people go out for walks and strolls. And they're taking their entire family. I mean, you have couples with maybe a 1-year-old. They're going out for a 1-hour stroll.
Right.
At midnight.
That's true.
Yeah. So before we get into C.O.P.E and what you do, I want to give a shout out to Lanny Clark. He's our wine sponsor. Basically, he sponsors the wine tastings. And so we have a William Hill Chardonnay. So hopefully you like it. And cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.
Now, how long have you lived in the Bay Area?
I've lived here for about 30 years. Originally, I came from Dallas, Texas. I was born in El Paso, Texas. After I graduated from college, went to Dallas, Texas, worked for Ross Perot. He had a company called EDS. It was electronic systems. And I worked there. And then after I left there, I went to work for corporate America, did some commercial real estate, worked in an escrow company. And kind of got tired of just working and trying to keep up with the Joneses and wanted to do something that was really meaningful. So I started doing a lot of volunteering at St. Vincent de Paul and some church volunteering, school volunteering. And then my husband was transferred out here to the Bay Area. He worked for the federal government. And I wanted to do something that was a little different. So I was looking for some place where I could make a difference. And eventually I ended up adopting a daughter. And when I did that, I walked into a nonprofit and basically never left. So I went into a parenting class, and then they asked me to work for them. And that was probably about 7 years that I was at that nonprofit.
And then at what time did you get the idea for founding C.O.P.E?
Well, I did that because while I was at that nonprofit, I went originally because I didn't know how to parent an adopted child. And I felt that there was a different way that you should parent. And I did realize that it was sort of an attachment. It's called attachment parenting. And I felt that a lot of people didn't really know that. You know, they just would parent a child as if it was their own biological child. And sometimes that does work, but the more education you have about what you should be looking out for, the better off you are.
It's very different. And,
it is.
And I don't come from a family, I'm not adopted, and my personal family hasn't adopted any kids, but my girlfriend was adopted. And I've had conversations with her parents as to how that entire process went for them, and we're talking about in the 70s, early 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And it's it's very interesting because even back then, even less education on
Right.
proper parenting, and it was definitely a challenge for them to kind of figure out, it's different. It's for sure different.
Right. We could go into a whole conversation about that, but there's always some kind of grief or loss that the adoptee feels because, it's really hard to imagine that you would have to be given up for adoption. The whole word given up, means that somebody didn't want you, right? But that's not always the situation, and there's ways to explain that. And so I walked into a nonprofit, and I took that information, and then I started to work for them I would facilitate parenting classes. And I got involved with the county with their adoption placement program. And I started to realize that it wasn't just adoptees, parents who were going to adopt that had issues with kids or didn't quite understand or felt overwhelmed when things went wrong. And I thought, there's got to be a place where a parent can go and not be judged and not feel like they are not good parents because they're having issues with their kids or, basically they feel overwhelmed, being a parent. So I got that idea and I started to think about it, and I left the nonprofit I was with because they actually closed their doors, which is very common. Nonprofits, this nonprofit had been around for 25 years, but a lot of nonprofits struggle to keep the doors open. And I started to think about what I wanted to do, and I really wanted to help parents enjoy being a parent. Because I had gone through a period where I didn't enjoy being a parent. There were so many issues that my daughter had, and I was so overwhelmed, and I didn't feel like I knew where to go or who to talk to. I felt judged. I felt, my self-esteem was really low because as a parent, that's, you want to be the best parent you can. And when your kids start having problems, then you don't feel good about yourself sometimes. So I wanted to have a place where parents felt safe, and they could come in, and it didn't have to be an adoption issue. It could be a drug issue. It could be, depression, mental health, emotional. It could be anything, just not getting along.
These days, right now in 2019, we're seeing a big spike in mental
Mental health
mental health or
issues.
disorders and issues with children and teenagers. I mean, just the level of anxiety and depression. If you see those charts, it's astronomical how they've jumped. And part of the problem, which is they're tying it to social media and easy access to the internet and them just being exposed to just everything. I mean, it's something very fresh and new in the evolution of humans.
I think it is. And, I think that that's one of the things that kids have to deal with today that they didn't have to deal with before. So they're on their phone. A lot of kids get their phone and they can keep their phones at night. They stay up, they're texting, they're trying to find out, if somebody likes them, somebody doesn't like them, or reading about other people. And, it's really, really tough to control that because you can get addicted to your phone, even as a little kid. And parents who aren't aware of that, or sometimes they just don't know how to deal with it. They really don't. It's such a commonplace that everybody has a phone, that if you take your phone from your kids,
That's
parents,
a form of punishment these days.
Yeah, but parents feel like, well, how am I going to get a hold of him? Well, how am I going to know where they're at? And, that's a whole different way of thinking. Their phone connects them to their kids, so they don't have to be connected to their kids. And it's like I say to a lot of parents who come in, I say, you got to take their phone away. And they'll say, well, yeah, but then safety, I don't know if they're safe. And I said, well, what are they calling you back when you're calling them when they're not supposed to be at home or they're doing something they're not supposed to be doing? They don't call you back. So what's the difference? You still don't know where they're at. So,
it's so true.
And parents are like, yeah, you're right. They don't answer the phone when I call them. Well, take the phone away. Well, I can't take the phone away. He won't give it to me. Well, then just cut off the service. He can keep the phone.
Well, and one of the problems I see is people will complain about that, right? But as soon as the child starts acting up, one of the very first things many parents do is give them the phone, give them an iPad and say, here, play with this, and then leave me alone.
Exactly.
And then that becomes a problem because you just re-encourage that same behavior instead of disciplining or teaching the child, hey, here's the proper way to handle this, or here's the proper way to act and behave. They just give them the electronic device.
Right. There's a lack of knowing how to give kids consequences. And that's one of the things that we do at C.O.P.E. We really teach parents strategies on how to deal with different situations. And the thing that we do, we use this curriculum called C.O.P.E America, C.O.P.E Positive Parenting. And it is evidence-based, which means that it's gone through rigorous trials to be certain that what they say the outcomes are really going to happen if you do exactly what they ask you to do as far as the curriculum and how you present it. And what we do is we will tell a parent, okay, we'll ask a parent, what is your main issue with your child? And they'll start with one issue, but then they'll start remembering, 10 other things. Yeah, and he does this and he does that and and when he doesn't do this. And what is one issue that you want to deal with? What is the main issue? And we're going to stick to that one issue and we're going to work on that. Well, what if so if his main issue is that he doesn't get up in the morning, okay, let's figure out why he doesn't get up in the morning. What's happening? So here's some strategies. We can either work on these strategies to get him up, and they'll say, yeah, he doesn't get up, but he's also failing his classes, or he's not showing up to school, or he's being disrespectful. And so that's kind of where you get that everything's so overwhelming. You have too many issues. So we teach them to deal with one issue at a time, and we give them a strategy that they've chosen, because we have a variety of strategies, and then they can internalize that strategy and generalize it to other issues in their life. For example, a strategy would be as simple as praise. So, praise your child when he does something good. So maybe all you're doing is telling him all the negative things that he does. So what positive thing, let's try that strategy this week. What positive thing does your child do? Well, he'll make his bed, but, his pajamas or sheets are all ruffled under. Well, that's not a good praise. If you're going to say, thank you for making your bed, that's all you're going to say. Thank you. I appreciate for making your bed. I appreciate you for, taking the time to make your bed. But next time, make sure your sheets are smoother. That's the way that parents praise. They're trying to give constructive criticism, but they need to learn how to praise.
Is that positive reinforcement?
That's positive reinforcement and keeping it positive. How many times do we give a positive with a negative? And what do you think the child's going to remember, the positive or the negative?
They're going to remember the negative and say, well, apparently I can never make them happy.
Right, exactly. And they'll give up. And, part of it is also that I think there's so many social pressures and there's so much stress sometimes in, family dynamics that you have to do something to really get their attention and let them know that you care. And that's part of, attachment. You attach when you are attached with somebody, when you fall in love with somebody, there's an attachment there. You want to please that person. If you don't care about that person or you think that person doesn't care about you or that you can't ever do anything to please them, you're not going to want to do anything for them or anything that they're asking you to do. So I think that it's really important nowadays for families to go places, spend time with their kids. Their kids have phones, they have friends, they've got a lot of things that are pulling them away from home, but there still has to be that connection to home. So how do you do that? And I can't tell anyone how to do it the way that I do it because everyone's home is different. So I may like to go to movies, and that could be our family thing, and our kids like going to movies. Or somebody else, they might like going to, they might like going to dances or doing parties or something else. It's whatever works in your family and whatever you feel would be a good family time spent together,
Yeah, it comes down to quality time.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this like a lot with people in that they say, oh, well, we do spend time together, but not really. They might be in the same room, but the kid is on their phone.
Exactly,
they're watching TV or doing something else. They're not really connecting. They're just in the same room together. That doesn't count as family time or quality time. You really have to connect with the person in some way. I mean,
sometimes it's music. I remember when my daughter was growing up, I did not like her music, but all she wanted me to do was to listen to her music. And when I listened to it, I would think it's disgusting. Why am I listening to this music?
But then you ended up with your own favorites, right?
Right, exactly. But she liked that time when we listened to music together. And a lot of times I think that for parents are overwhelmed. Everyone has to work. Here in California, we have to travel, at least 30 to an hour, to get to work and get back home. And we're exhausted because we're in traffic. So parents have to learn to take care of themselves. Because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody else that well.
And I think that's where it gets overwhelming for a lot of parents, because many parents might be in the mentality or thinking, well, I'm just trying to take care of myself. Right. How the hell am I supposed to take care of a child on top of it? And here I am going nuts because I've got my own priorities, my own issues, my own, things happening in life. And then my kid has their own stuff happening. How do I balance this? And it just becomes very overwhelming. And I guess that's where the entire strategy of just taking everything step by step, focusing on one issue at a time, right, really comes in handy, because then you don't become overwhelmed. You're focused.
Right. And it gives you a tool. It's like if you were to go into therapy, the therapist would say, what is it that you want to really improve about your life? Well, I want to be a happier person. All right, so let's talk about what makes you happy. Well, it makes me happy to go to the park. It makes me happy to listen to music. It makes me happy to go out with my friends. All right, so what are some of the ways that you can spend more time doing that? Well, I have to work all the time, so I'm working and I barely have any time or any money to do things. All right, then let's just think about some steps to getting there. Let's first take going out to the park. How much money does that take? Nothing. So when could you go out to the park? Well, I guess I could go, on a Sunday. Okay, what time on Sunday? Well, I have to, Sunday's usually the day I do all my laundry. So you have to walk through the steps with somebody as to how they can actually meet their goals. And sometimes it's tough and sometimes you have to revise it. But it's all about taking those small steps to get where you want to get to. And I think people are in a rush. They come to us and they say, I don't want to learn attachment parenting. I just want to learn how to deal with this problem. Well, you first have to learn to understand child development and what they're capable of, as far as their age. And then you have to understand how to take care of yourself so you can be a positive parent and you're not overwhelmed. So do you eat regularly? Do you exercise? Do you get enough sleep? Do you take time away from TV and phone time? Do you go outside? Do you have, do you get some sun? What about your emotional state? Do you spend time with your family? Do you talk about your emotions? Do you have somebody that you can call when you're feeling down? What about your creative and spiritual self? Because if you did all of those things, you wouldn't be so overwhelmed and feel like everything is falling on your shoulders and you can't handle that. So when your kid comes home and has a problem, you're in a better space to deal with it.
So it's funny. You're really training the adult. You're not really helping the kid. I mean, you help the kid in a roundabout way,
right.
But through the adult.
Right, because parents have such a big effect on their children. If parents are stressed, then just if a parent gets stressed, it could affect their immunity, right? So it affects their health. It affects they get depressed. They get angry. They don't have any patience, and a child is not going to feel like they can come to their parents or trust their parents or that their parents are a safe person for them to deal with any issues that they have. So,
what are some of the biggest issues that you see children facing today?
Well, you mentioned it, anxiety. Anxiety is like, I don't know, it's just everybody has anxiety and everybody.
And do you agree with that? The social media, the internet environment that has really been skyrocketing for the last 12 years. Mm-hmm. You think that's one of the biggest reasons, biggest cause?
I think that's what we look at, and there's a lot of good reasons why we think that that's happening. There are a lot of lies out there on social media. You should be able to wear, name brand shoes, that are $300 or whatever. And if you don't, then, pretty not popular. You shouldn't be happy. Girls, obviously, they have the image, where they have to feel like they're really thin and they're not accepted unless they are. And so they get depressed. And then there's people who bully you on the internet. So there's a lot of reason to be anxious. And I think also the internet exposes them to a lot of things that they're not ready. They're not ready because of their age and because of their maturity and just brain development. You're not ready to see the things that you get to see on the internet. And there's no one there protecting you unless your parents have taken away your phone and monitor it, which is absolutely impossible to do that 24/7.
Well, nowadays, like Apple phones and various Wi-Fi systems allow the parents to put in various different restrictions. You have the basic parental controls that you can put in, but you also have time limits for when they can connect to Wi-Fi or have internet access. And as technology advances, I think parents have much more control these days over their children's internet usage that they didn't have even 10 years ago.
That may be right, but I think that I would tend to disagree a little bit because they can get to a computer any place, so it's not just at home. And
they can tell the parents are going to the library to study.
Right, exactly. I'm reading an article that says the number of children seeing a psychiatrist has risen by a third. And it's an epidemic of anxiety. It's risen by nearly 70% between 2011 and 2014. So it is, and it's not just underprivileged kids, it's privileged kids too that are having anxiety. So why do you think that's happening? There's a lot of things that are happening on the internet that we have no idea. We don't know. Girls can easily get hooked up to somebody who's going to traffic them without even realizing it. There's a lot of predators on the internet. I think that it's very confusing. I think that it's a whole new world. It's really not. There isn't enough protection put out there for little kids. And you're right. Parents themselves will give a child their iPhone or iPad to watch something. And you see these little 2-year-olds swiping. I mean, they do that better than we do. My grandson was able to, we have Netflix, and I started seeing all these charges on, not Netflix, I think it's Amazon. And I started seeing all these charges for these cartoons. I mean, he's only 4 and he was just swiping and, watching a cartoon for 10 minutes, then going on to and renting them. He knew how to do that. I don't even know how to do that. I had to look at it and ask my daughter, how do you do this? Because my little grandson's doing it. So they're much more able and capable to maneuver computers and find things that they don't even know are dangerous.
Yeah, and one of the biggest problems with social media is people comparing themselves to these social accounts that are based around creating a lavish lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have that lavish lifestyle, who are you? You're nobody. And because you're nobody, what's the whole point of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it just snowballs into this really big problem. And it really comes down to teaching your kids that I think it really comes down to, you have to understand that these lifestyle accounts on Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat are exaggerated. I mean, many of this stuff is staged. I mean, probably 90% of the lavish lifestyle accounts are staged. People go rent cars and make it seem as if they've got a big successful business and they drive a Lamborghini around everywhere. They've got cash laying on the passenger seat of a Lamborghini. Mm-hmm. And it's just ridiculous. But how do you explain that to children?
Yeah, that's the hard part really is how do you really deal with that? Because your kids are going to say, no, Mom, you don't really understand. You don't know anything about that. And they're right. Sometimes parents don't know, what Instagram is. I mean, I think everybody knows what Facebook is, but they've left Facebook because too many parents are on Facebook now. And I think that just, educating yourself, being open to the fact that, you need to learn about all of this. You need to know, if you see your kid get up in the morning and he's tired and pale, and he didn't sleep well. Well, why didn't he sleep well? What's the reason? Find out, talk to him, connect with them. And they may or may not tell you, but you need to find out, because if you don't intervene, no one else will. And kids need boundaries. They really do. It makes them feel safe because they know that there's somebody there who's going to keep them from getting into trouble. And I think a lot of times parents want to be friends, or they just, I have a lot of parents who come in and they say, well, they don't listen to me. They don't listen to me. Well, what do you do? Are you still buying them clothes? Are you still buying them the clothes they want? Or are you buying them the clothes you can afford? Are you still, giving them a phone? Do you give them money to go out and yet they don't come back home when they're supposed to? So there are a lot of things that you can do. And there's a lot of things that you can do that may or may not help them, but it's actually going to teach them that there are outcomes. And as a parent, you need to be strong enough to parent. You can't be a wimpy parent. You can't say something and then go back and let them and take that back. So, you're not going to go out for a week and then 2 days later you let them go out. Or, you're not going to get your phone back and they start bugging you and you can't really handle the nagging and you give it back to them. So you have to really be a strong parent, and you have to be a parent who feels confident about yourself. And I think that's what we do at C.O.P.E. We give parents confidence to be a positive parent. And we don't judge them. We don't tell them, hey, if you think that letting your 16-year-old stay out till 12 o'clock, that's not my issue. If that's the way you want your rules to go at home, then that's fine. But how do you enforce that when they start staying out till 2 o'clock? So what we do is give them tools and help them feel confident and empower them to be better parents. And that in turn, they're modeling to their kids, how to deal with issues. So you're not going to yell, you're not going to cuss, you're going to be very calm, and you're going to be very confident that, hey, this is what's going to happen. Well, if you don't want to go to school, I'm not going to let you stay home and do nothing. You're going to have to do your homework here or, come up with something. But a lot of parents say, well, they just don't want to do it. I can't get them to do anything. And that is true. They can't, because parents themselves aren't equipped to be the kind of parents that feel like, okay, I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to go ahead and teach my child that these are the rules, and they have to be fair, obviously, and they have to feel loved, but you have to be consistent. That's one of the main things that I see, that they're not consistent. We as parents tend not to be consistent because we get overwhelmed ourselves. We have a lot of other responsibilities.
Now, what programs do you have over at C.O.P.E?
So we do individual psychotherapy. So we do counseling, we do case management. And with that, we deal with individuals, couples, family therapy. We do child and adolescent therapy. We do victims of crime therapy. And sometimes we deal a lot with parents who, all kinds of parents really, but I'll give you an example. We have parents who have had their kids taken away from them because of maybe abuse, neglect, drug use. We have parents who are very well-to-do parents who come in because their kids are out of control. Maybe their kid, a lot of times, are depressed, anxious, can't get up, or also doing drugs. So we work with each person individually. We'll work with the child, with the teenager. We might put them into a youth empowerment class, which kind of teaches them to sort of process where they're at and what's keeping them from being the best that they can be. It doesn't tell them, okay, you have to go to school, you have to do this. We really kind of go through, what is it that you wanted to be? When you were a little kid, what did you want to be? What made you excited? What did you think you were going to be when you grew up? And where's that dream now? And we do things like life maps. Okay, so this is where you are here. How did you get here? And how are you going to get where you want to be? And with parents, there's a whole variety of things they can do. We can do one-on-one coaching with them. So we coach them with a certain situation or challenge that they have, or they can go into therapy, or they go into parenting classes. So we do a variety of parenting classes, and there's a lot of different levels in our parenting classes. It could be that they come for 2 hours. It could be that they come 4 weeks for an hour or two. They could come 9 or 12 weeks or 15 weeks, depending on what the issue is and how much more help they need.
Now, I see a program you have here is C.O.P.E Positive Parenting Program. Can you explain a little bit more what that is?
Well, as I mentioned before, that is an evidence-based program, and it is one of the world's most effective parenting programs. It has over 90 trials all over the world. It's practiced in Spain, Japan, all over, and here in the United States, it's had about probably 24 trials here, and there's a lot of different levels to it. It's not a one-size-fits-all. You don't just come in and take a parenting class. We do an evaluation, we do an assessment, we find out what the issue is, and it's more of a therapeutic coaching class. So parents come in and they learn what positive parenting is. They learn age-related issues that might come up with kids and how to deal with them. And
well, I mean, issues for children under 12 compared to teenagers is completely
it's very different. Yeah. So there is a teenage C.O.P.E, there is a school age C.O.P.E, there is a toddler C.O.P.E. So the strategies that you use are different for each of those kids. It's not a one size fits all.
And I would imagine the younger the child, the more, I guess it's more important to jump in and make sure that you have these lessons in place and these strategies, because how you raise them from a baby and toddler does affect the outcome as teenagers and as adults, right?
It does. And so basically what we teach parents is to really regulate their emotions. So how do you regulate your emotions? We teach them how to problem solve on their own. We teach them to be dependent on their own resources, so they're not having to go out and ask people. It's okay to do that, but where do you find help, and how do you get help as a parent? So problem solve, and then put in the effort, because the effort that you put in, there's going to be an outcome. And so a lot of times parents don't think that, oh, it doesn't matter if I do this. It doesn't matter if I spend Saturday morning with my kid. He's not going to want to be with me. But there is an outcome to that, and it's a positive outcome. And if you continue to do it, you're going to see a change. So we teach them about personal agency. Whatever you put into it is what you're going to get back out of it. And we teach them how to maintain a relationship with their child. So maybe your child is going off to school and you are nervous about that and you are starting to get anxious about that. Well, your child's going to get anxious about that too. So
I feel like that most parents are probably more anxious than their own kid.
Yeah, they are. And, you have these helicopter parents that are watching their kid, and their kid feels like they can't breathe. So what do they need? And what is the parent? So you say we deal with the parents more. Yes, because the parents are the ones that are interacting, and parents are the biggest influence on their child, especially when they're young. Then when they become teenagers, they start going off and finding themselves. They start separating, and that's natural. And parents sometimes can't handle that really well. They really want to have that complete control over their child. So how do you start giving them some independence and still have them, and still feel like you have some control over them and that you're protecting them? So it's the toughest thing you're ever going to do is be a parent. Mm-hmm. It's the toughest job you're ever going to have. I don't care what anybody says. That is a tough job. Yeah. So.
Especially if you want to do a good job.
Yeah. And it's never the same. I mean, everyone has a different personality. And, you deal with some kids that are easy to deal with and some kids that aren't. You really, really, sometimes there's no rhyme or reason why one child just has more issues than another child in your same family.
Yeah, it can be tough just leaving medical issues out. Mm-hmm. It can be very tough. And then throw in some kind of medical problem issue that they're dealing with. Now it can double, even triple the amount of work and time and effort you have to spend into raising your child.
Right. So, the more tools you have and the more confident that you are in yourself, and the more education that you continue to get education to deal with your kids, because that's just a relationship situation, and how you deal with relationships is really important. Your kids are watching. Do you lose your temper a lot? Do you go down the store, you tell your kids you got to be nice, you can't fight, but then they see you arguing with with somebody at the counter because they didn't, give you exactly what you ordered. So what are you teaching your kids? And being aware of that, being aware of how important the way that you act and the way that you react
They're
is.
Sponges, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. So now, we do work with parents who have kids who have special needs. And we find that those parents who have special needs are the ones that really, they have not just that added responsibility of having a child with special needs that other people around them don't understand, but they also have issues within the marriage because it's really tough to raise a child with special needs. And so the more educated that they get, the better off they are as a couple. So we offer that class too.
Now, as an organization, how do you bring awareness to the public about these various different issues that, you help parents with?
Well, that's, we do a lot of fundraisers. We do open our classes to the public. We try to get the media to talk about some of the issues that we have. For example, one of my biggest really hopes this last year was to bring more attention to the problem of truancy and chronic absenteeism in our county. And so by doing that, I think we were putting
Is that becoming a much bigger problem?
Back in 2014, Contra Costa County was the highest county in the 8 surrounding counties. Contra Costa County had the highest truancy and chronic absenteeism. So what that does is, and really the highest in the younger kids. So when you take kids who start out in kindergarten, first grade up to third grade, they're learning to read. And when they don't learn to read, they can't read to learn. So they get behind. And then you have a teenager who's not going to school because they read at a third grade level and they're embarrassed. So that was something that I really wanted to put out. And I called the media, I talked to them about some of the classes that we had and some of the work that we're doing. We have fundraisers to help pay for that because a lot of those families can't pay for therapy and classes and coaching, to help them with that. So that's how we kind of get it out. We also have a newsletter that we put out. We've got our webpage. We work with 23 other nonprofits who put out information. I think that going to the schools, we're pretty well known at the schools, and so we're one of the agencies that work with truant kids and families who have kids who aren't going to school. When they're younger, it's the parents' responsibility. Up until 7th or 8th grade, it's the parents' responsibility. So now we have a truancy court. We have a parent court that was started about 3 years ago by a district attorney and a judge. Judge Rebecca Hardy and Assistant Attorney Laura Delahunt. And this was a parent truancy court where parents who had kids that were in kindergarten through 7th or 8th grade were actually brought to court. And after they had gone through school reviews, academic reviews through school, and the school had many attempts to get the parents to get their kids to school. That didn't work. They sent them to court. And parents could be fined up to $1,000, if they didn't get their child in school. And they're usually given a year to do that. And they're not fined. Their fine is stayed, but they have issues. It's the parent who is not getting their child in. So it could be that there's an illness in the family. It could be that there's a drug situation, abuse, and parents can't get up to get their kids. Could be neglect. It could also be that parents they don't really think it's important to get their kids to school if they're in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. They just feel like they're not going to miss that much.
Yeah, and that's one thing that's very unfortunate because, and you see this in some neighborhoods where you have a lot of parents that just kind of gave up. Right. And when they give up, they have no hope for their kid. And then the kid gets stuck in that same cycle of, well, what good is school going to do me if this is my life? This is just the way things are. And then they lose hope. And here on the podcast, we've interviewed several other nonprofits that focus on, especially in this day and age when so many schools are cutting funding from after school programs and sports and things that really are good for the children to keep their mind active and keep them busy and expose them to many new things. That's one of the key components too in raising your kid is exposing them to many different things and teaching them how to handle various different solutions or teaching them solutions to different problems and showing them that there's a big world out there and possibilities are endless and they just need to figure out their own way. But the problem is when you don't give or teach the children those options or expose them to that because maybe you yourself are stuck in that same cycle, then it just kind of snowballs and just continues generation after generation.
That's true. And I think that's the saddest part of what we see, is if we can't help a family break out of that cycle. And I think that, we do at C.O.P.E is we really, really try to help families. We don't let go. If they can't afford to come in and they can't afford any of our services, we find a way to give it to them free. Or we find another nonprofit that has a program that'll help them. And we don't just refer them, we check in on them and we make sure that they're okay. We try to do that, and we have very limited sources in doing that. We are funded through County Mental Health and First Five and Children Family Services. We have some funding there, but there's always, for example, we don't have any funding for anger management, and a lot of our kids have anger issues. And that takes, you can't really just talk about anger and say, okay, well, you took a couple of classes. That's like, that's reteaching them how to think and how to look at life and teaching them about emotional intelligence. And it takes a while, So I would say that 52 weeks is the minimum that somebody would come in and learn how to deal with their anger. And so that takes a lot of effort, and I think the community needs to know about all this. They need to know how, if we don't help our kids, that's our future. And how much money do we have to spend to have a program that's for prevention as opposed to intervention? So we're preventing an issue, maybe a drug issue, or we're teaching kids how important it is to go to school, that's not going to cost as much as we've got, a bunch of adults that didn't get a high school education and now are on welfare or, need county assistance. And those individuals have higher rates of medical needs and emotional and mental needs because, they're living at a poverty level. And that causes a lot of other issues and it's a big expense for our county. You were talking about not having any after-school daycare. Well, schools get paid by the number of kids that attend. So if you have a lot of kids who aren't attending, your funding gets cut.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
Yeah.
So where do you see C.O.P.E in the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, I would love to see C.O.P.E become a one-stop shop for parenting and parent education. And when I say parenting and parent education, anything that has to do with a challenge or an issue, anything to nurture a healthy family. So one of the things that we've seen this year is a lot of vaping. That's last year it was truancy. This year it's vaping. There's always something that you have to get education. You have to get educated and you have to learn how to deal with. And I would love for C.O.P.E to become, to have different centers all over that just specialize in parenting.
Where's C.O.P.E located
issues.
Right now?
We're located in Concord. We're at 2280 Diamond Boulevard, but we serve the entire region, the entire county. So we actually go to Family Justice Center here. We do classes in West County. We do classes at schools. We provide classes at the first 5 centers. So we are all over.
And then what C.O.P.E is an acronym?
It's an acronym for Counseling Options and Parent Education.
So Cathy, I want to thank you for being on the show.
You're welcome.
It's a pleasure having you on. This is one of those topics that I really think more and more people need to know about. And it's very unfortunate to see that a lot of the media is focused around a lot of negativity these days and not around positivity or certain really core issues that, hey, we understand this stuff is happening, but at the core of it all, we need to focus on the mental health of our children and the next generation that's growing up that will one day run this country.
That's right. And nurture families, nurture healthy families, emotional, social, just families that are happy.
So real quick, and we'll go ahead and link it up on the description and on Facebook. What's the website for C.O.P.E?
Website is www.copefamilysupport.org.
Perfect. And then the list of services and how people can register or even come in for a consultation is available on the website.
It
correct?
is, yes.
Perfect.
So call us.
Perfect. So Cathy,
Thank
you
you
for being on the podcast, and it was a pleasure having you on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Thank you to our producer, Sam Lubman. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share the podcast. Remember, you can listen to the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, iHeartRadio, Google Play, SoundCloud, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. For more information on my business as a property manager and real estate team, go visit my website at marcguzman.com. I really want to thank all of you for listening. It means the world to me, and I hope today's episode provides you value in your day-to-day life. I created this podcast to help showcase the many great people that live in this world and help share some knowledge that I've learned along the way in life. Again, thank you for listening. Check out our sponsors, and I'll catch you on the next episode.